Strap on your boots and your belt buckles, ladies and gents. It's time to learn about how to paint clothes. So today I'm going to be teaching you a little bit about how to understand doing clothes folds, and then we'll be practicing a couple of different types of clothing, and then we'll try to render out the outfit that we made for Leah. And hopefully that will be helpful for you for figuring out how to design your clothes for your own characters. And keep in mind, because this is imaginary, right? That means you can have as crazy of clothes that you want, but as long as you have the core foundation of light and shadow, you'll be fine. So let's get started. So first we're gonna understand what clothes folds are consistent of and how do you make it, right? So the basic idea of clothes folds is you're gonna have your light, your base shade, and then your darkest shadows. And so suppose I do this kind of clothes fold. We're gonna treat that as your base shade. We're gonna put in your lightest value. And always next to that lightest value is going to be a shadow. And that's how you create the idea of a fold, right? And just by making sure that right next to a light area, you have a darker area, it's going to create the illusion that this is like sunken in. And so that's why there's this really dark shadow in comparison to the light. So how about we try doing this fabric study, and then I can talk a little bit about my process of like understanding how do I cleanly do it. So there's the misnomer that when you do blending between light and dark, you should always use soft brush, but that is usually not the case, especially for fabrics that are tougher like this. So when you have folds like this, you want to be as clean as possible because you want the folds to be defined, and then when it's defined, it's going to read as a fold rather than, say, some muddy values. And so I'm going to set ourselves just a base layer. And I find that it's easier to add in the light areas and erase away to create like a much more impactful contrast, rather than, say, if you started with the lightest areas and then try to add in the medium shade and then the dark shade. That will usually tend to be much more difficult, because if you can imagine like trying to blend these middle shades and these darker shades into a super light shade already, like how else are you gonna like judge value wise, right? You've already gone way bright. So when fabric falls, you have to think about how gravity works, right? So when gravity is applied to fabric, it's going to drape down and create all these beautiful mountain shapes. So I can fit in everything. And feel free to follow along with me if you're interested. I will be including the photo of this drapery as part of like the resources so you can do it yourself. So we have our base shade, right? General shape. You can see it sort of looks like a Christmas tree almost. And then we're now going to come in with our lighter values. And so lock this layer, right? Where is our lightest value? You see these edges? I'm also going to darken the background so you can actually see it. All right, perfect. So here's our light values, and it's going to create these kind of V-shaped folds. And remember, the goal is to see big shapes rather than focusing on the individual folds. And so I'm seeing this kind of V shape again, another V shape, and I'm going to use a lasso tool to get that kind of beautiful curve. Another light fold right here. You can see how I basically condensed the shape of these folds into very interesting silhouettes. right? So even if I don't go further on besides doing this light value, it'll still sort of read like fabric because you have these really strong core shapes. And so this side has that light value again, just like that. One more right here. And this one has a little bit more gradation, so I'm going to take a lasso tool. Make sure that edge stays clean, but the other side can be a little more fuzzy. The key between fuzzy values and like folds is that the side that has the shadow should remain clean. Right, and then we've got one more. We blend that part out. Right here, we're gonna blend outwards towards that light, but note that this edge has to stay really clean. Right, you can see wherever I have an edge, I know the distinction to make it clean, whereas the ones where it's the edge is not as, it's just not as like folded inwards and it's not a clear edge, it's gonna be softer. And I'll zoom in a bit so you can see it just a tad better. All right, but when you're painting, your goal is to try to keep relatively further away, so you're forcing your eyes to kind of look at the bigger shapes. Right, you can see that it's already shaping up, and I didn't even do that many things to it. Keep that clean. And we'll do a tiny bit of gradation here. As you can see, it's not such a harsh edge as in the ones where your fabrics are folded into each other and right next to each other. This one is more like gradual. And so that's how you can understand when you're doing dress folds, shirt folds, etc., whether or not it's a gradual fold or is it a more immediate crease, right? And I decided to use this kind of square 128 brush instead of a soft brush because it has a little bit of structure, but it is helping with like blending out that edge. All right, and then we have one more huge fold, and so I'm gonna take my block brush again, my favorite number 40, as you can tell already, and map in that huge shape. Squint your eyes, identify it. We're gonna get that edge that belongs here. This right here is like the number one fold, and then the second fold. So then we gotta clean that up, make sure we define that these are two separate areas. We're also gonna start going darker in value. As you can see, this whole region is in shadow, right? And then there's just the tiniest bit of bounce light right here. Right, a clean edge is very important. We're going to get rid of that kind of stuttery look from the lasso by cleaning up with our brush. And since fabric is a 3D entity, it means that even when it folds like that, it's going to have a slight bit of edge and it's not going to completely, you know, touch all the way to that darkness. Hence why this right here gets that kind of bounce light. Right, so that's how you would do that type of edge. And then you notice that this is actually a lot skinnier than I rendered it, so I'm gonna make sure I get that. And take my square brush, get some of that skinniness in there and make sure we're highlighting how bright it is. Now we're gonna finally go in with like our really dark shadows, right? Gotta define some of these areas so there's contrast in this piece and it doesn't look really flat. So right here, you've got yourself a super concentrated shadow. Go over it. We don't care that it's a super flat form, we just want to make sure that we get the shadow in there. Right next to the shadow again is a light area. Right, and then this portion is going to be a gradual rounding of that kind of form so it doesn't cut as straight as we drew it. But we make sure to capture like that kind of pushing edge, keep this edge really sharp. Here's where we get our core shadow in there. Right, we're gonna gradually smooth that out. Smooth this part out just a tad bit, push it out a little bit. Even take our number 128 brush, get some of that out there. Not too much because we do want to keep that really straight line kind of form. And then we're going to start with our nuances. This part is getting some of that bounce light, so it's going to be slightly lighter. And we're also going to darken up that edge so it looks even more dramatic. Right here in contrast to the light. Square brush. See how light that edge became because we decided to add a bit of shadow right underneath it. Clean up that edge. Right here we notice that this part has this really bright fold. And this edge will look lighter once we add in this darkness, right? Look. Just like that, see? Just cleaning up that edge so it looks a tad bit more straight and less shaky. This right here is slightly less dark, so we're gonna make sure that that bounce light is being captured. But it still reads as a shadow, right? Now squint our eyes. Are the shadows dark enough? Seems like a good time to get this little shadow in there. So it's going to create this kind of horseshoe U shape, sort of dips in a little bit. We're going to bust out our 128 again. This shadow right here is going to be really dark, so we got to get it. There we go. Even starting to approach black at this point because it's so far down. And it's so hidden within the cloth that all the shadow is just being caught up. Gonna clean up those edges. We're gonna darken up this edge. Using the lasso tool is so hard. Okay. Darken up that edge. We're gonna come back with a 128 brush. And softly create a like sort of darker edge that you can see where it highlights like the brightest part of that side of the cloth. Right? And even this has like a really coarse shadow, so we're gonna get that in there. I'm gonna unlock that layer, trying to fix up some of that dirty edge on the sides. Just look at that beautiful light. Oh god, I turned country for some reason. Promise you, I'm not from the Southwest or whatnot. I don't know, I default to country accent. Shadow right here again. And I'm pretty sure it's like partially there's the background there. So I'm not gonna worry too much about that part. We're just like and ignore it because the main focus is just to show you how to get these fabric folds to like pop. So again, we gotta make sure that even after we gradiated, we made sure that we still have a slight edge to indicate it's a fold and it's not like around like a sphere. I'm going to darken up this shadow also, especially around the edges where light is probably not going to be seen very well, right? And by darkening, we're able to create a kind of separation between this and this edge, this cloth fabric. We're going to smooth that out a little bit, at least at the center part, not too much. Lock the layer, and we're going to come back in, darken up this particular edge. Especially where these boundaries are, we want to make sure that that light really pops, so we're going to darken up that edge again. Right, you can see just how much I'm trying to bring out that contrast. And right here, we're going to have some subtle nuances. So we're going to lighten that up, create ourselves, not lighten up, darken it up, create ourselves that sort of dip, right? And now you can see why I told you it's harder to do light and then add dark. Do your darks first and then add light, because me trying to blend out this little dip is a pain in the butt right now. Again, keeping those edges, right? When you have sharp edges, they look a lot better than, say, like really smoothed out. There's that core shadow, so we've got to get that in there. And once we've got it in there, we're going to define our really dark shadow. So dark you can see it a mile away. And you're going to see that I want to darken that regular shadow, so I'm going to take my brush, change the mode to multiply, and darken up that shadow so it looks more similar to, say, this value here, because when you squint, it's pretty close in value. There we go. Go back to our normal layer, or our normal mode. I pick back this color. We're just doing last touches of darkening up. See, you can see just how well the folds read because I had a good combination of dark edge against a white contrast to a white edge. And the key is for these types of fabric especially, they're stiffer, and so you're going to want to use more angled lines and less smooth out lines. And so let's try making some clothes that are not draped over fabric, right? And so when it comes to suit jackets like this, the key point to notice for jackets like this is that there are wrinkles around the arm edge, wherever your arms are bending, right? Right here. His arm bends right here, so you're gonna get a lot of wrinkles around this portion. And the general shape of a suit typically has sort of this shape, and so very stiff shoulders. And so you're never going to see that the shoulders will have any wrinkles, especially like right here. Your wrinkles are mostly going to come down into the arm area where your arm is trying to like bend and do things. And this part of the suit also, not too much, maybe just a little bit if you're wearing a size too small. But in general, the concept of a suit, it's very tailored fit. So you're gonna get the silhouette of someone, say, with the triangle upside down Dorito shape. You're gonna get very stiff, very broad shoulders with more tapered arms that have bends maybe around the elbow region. Very tip-top shape. This part is typically sticking out. The collars are sticking out. The suit flaps, I guess what they're called, varies depending on whether you have those like penguin suits or like this type of suit. A little buttoned up. They're gonna flare out just a tad bit in order to accommodate like your walking and stuff. Gosh, we love using neon orange, don't we? Okay, I'm gonna choose a different color that y'all can actually see. Slightly better than this. A lot more pleasant to the eyes, at least for me. Okay, let's do this color. And so Dorito shape, really tailored kind of pants, so they're gonna be tapering. So upside down kind of ice cream cones in a way. See right here, tapered. They're going to be tapered, yet not too tight on the legs. And the goal of the arm sleeves is they have to not outstretch the wrist, right? Get you some really nice loafers. This guy ain't wearing those long socks, which I guess makes you look a little more put together, but I don't understand why that is, right? Like you would think you want to see socks to show like this guy ain't just walking around without socks. Right, that's the general idea of a suit, and then you might see variations where the suit collars might look like this. And so if you're ever in need of like designing a suit and you don't understand like how it's supposed to bend or like maybe where the shadows are, that's where Google becomes like your bestest of friends. It has so many reference photos, but obviously it's not going to have exact one that you're going to need. So just make sure when you're looking at these reference photos, what you're doing is you're analyzing like what is the shadow doing here, right? it's going to have cast a shadow here because it's sloping downwards and the light is not catching it as well. Or like there is shadow here because that's where there's a lot of bends and it's sloping downwards, etc., right? And next up on the docket, oh, I have some more fabric folds which I can just showcase to you like the general idea of, again, how would you go about like creating folds for dresses and stuff. So like say you wanted to depict someone like resting on their arm and there's fabric all around, right? In general, it is very difficult for me at least to like just naturally imagine how fabric would work. So that's where I look for a lot of reference photos, but occasionally I can sort of imagine how it might look, especially like simple drapery, like if it's just falling off a table or something. Let's see. Just doing a very quick, loosey-goosey kind of thing. So like, okay, maybe there might be some folds here, right? Obviously the fabric would be draping here, draping here. If this part of the fabric's a little shorter, it would look like this, triangles. A lot of triangles occur whenever you see fabric folds. A lot of cups appear. So if you can imagine cups and triangles and little sandwich breads, that should help cover the whole idea of like what are the different varieties you're going to get, combinations, right? For simple folds, where it's more complex right here, you're still going to try to recognize where the cup shapes are coming from. Like here's a cup, here's a cup. This is where your sandwich fold comes in. Normal fold, sandwich fold, right? And then maybe be careful not to press F or else you're gonna go into full screen like me. Woo woo. Anyway, so like right here, maybe this would be like a cupped region because the fabric is lying flat on the table and it's being bunched up like this. Or maybe I might think that the fabric would do this, right? So whenever that situation occurs that I'm not too sure, this is where I try to just experiment with like shapes and see if it works. And honestly, if you just able to give the impression of fabric, right? It doesn't even matter if it's like super, super, super accurate. And that's where your basic understanding of fabric folds come in. Like if you're able to understand how to create the illusion of fabric like this, right? You're not gonna bank at me, be like, oh, that's not how actual fabric would fold, man. You're tripping. You know fabric actually can't bend that way, or like it would actually bend this way because your knee is doing blah 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 blah. It's my imagination. Looks close enough to real fabric, so why do you care, right? I'm not gonna come to your door and kick down your bedroom door and be like, hey, you got that fold wrong. Do it again. And as always, like I said, start with your lights and your super, super darks and then try to transition in between those. And it usually will help you figure out how your fabrics will fold. And the key point to these is try not to have too much light. And when you're doing the light part, try to think of big, interesting silhouettes. And those usually will help pull off the whole case and stuff. Again, this is like a really messy version of how I would usually do this, but it's the general idea of like working out the general shape of the fabric fold, not worrying too much about like whether or not it's accurate. Just making sure you're keeping the lights and dark and trying to get some interesting silhouettes going on. I don't know, maybe something like that, right? Sort of looks like fabric, sort of works. You would build more interesting silhouettes than that. And I would all thought we would talk about doing jackets like this, where it might vary based on how the light hits it. So like creating the illusion of this shiny material. So what are the key points of observing how the light works here? You're gonna notice that this jacket is fat, so the folds on the sleeves are large. They're gonna be large like this, and they're not gonna be small like regular t-shirts, right? Versus say like this. Contrast between these two, and that's how you can create the illusion of the thickness of material. So like another thing you should notice when you're doing these is the shape of the overall jacket. Unlike a shirt where it's gonna follow the contour of like your person, say like I drew a t-shirt or a regular button-down shirt, it's going to follow the contour of my person. Right, you can see all the silhouette of their actual anatomy versus this where it's a very poofed out and you're only seeing the overall cut of the jacket rather than the person. And this can mean you can make really interesting silhouettes, right? This silhouette creates the illusion of like being smaller, like being engulfed by something, whereas this is a little more elegant, like maybe they're wearing a really cute bodycon dress, right? And so that's why. And then it has like exposes everything. It kind of forces that character to be able to be confident in their own silhouette. And then another thing we will be noticing when we're observing pictures like this and learning what material properties are is how the light shines on it. So you see how the material here is sort of shiny at places, but it's not like super shiny like in leather jackets. Leather jackets, you have such a huge contrast. You're gonna get something like this, and maybe their sleeve, they have like a huge old kind of highlight in their jacket, right? Jacket sleeve. Pardon my really ugly impromptu jacket. But as just an example, maybe their jacket would do something like this, right? Where you have a lot more specular highlights versus say this material that is a lot less shiny and it's not leather or anything. And so it won't have as many of these like random really bright hit spots. Right, that's leather, this is not leather. And for jeans are relatively matte material, and so you're going to create texture using your various brushes, which is what I will be talking about in the next video. But just in general, jeans, if you don't know how to draw them, look up your reference picture, right? Reference picture, reference picture, reference picture. Don't stress too much about not being able to draw it. Use your observation skills that you've been practicing throughout this class. And as you practice more and more, it's going to become more intuitive. And from there, you can start doing jumping points to more imaginative outfits, like with Leah, right? Let's pull up Leah's outfit like that. Push her over here. And we're just going to do a real quick rendering. It's not going to be amazing, but I will try to work as fast as possible so you get to see just how I would go about like painting a character's outfit, right? So I'm just gonna start right now. I'll see you in a bit. Anyway, this is like the closest I'll get without having to spend a couple of days on it refining the design and everything. But you just basically see how like, oh, I forgot the dress. You just basically see how I'm playing around with like overall silhouettes and stuff in order to create sort of an interesting flow of her outfit and everything. Yeah, I'll probably look up some more reference photos for that part. But regardless, that's basically how I typically go about doing these types of illustration. I play around with the design, and then the clothing is something that once you understand how to do folds and like generic basic shadows and lights, it becomes really easy to just give the impression of and not necessarily have to do super realistic, because that's what semi-realism or stylized art is all about, right? Just giving the impression of it. So I will see you in the next video. Until then,